must preface this story by saying there are many challenges in its telling. Due to records being lost, misplaced, or potentially other reasons, I have been reliant on inconsistent statements made to or by newspapers of the day. A myriad of fanciful interpretive suppositions and rumor, trying to trace movements, finding approximate locations of persons or landmarks, and, well, just being a nearly 133-year-old unsolved homicide. It almost seems as if some people of the day, and time itself, wanted to forget Katie Dugan. But after coming across her story almost a year ago now, it's as if she wouldn't let me forget. I slowly dug around, in between stories and life in general, and tried to make sense of the quagmire I found myself in. I've also had to rewrite this story multiple times, as I did not intend to write a book, nor have any desire to do so. I'm trying to give details without going over the top or being too biased. Much of the locations, movements, or chain of events are approximate only, are based on what I could sift through or piece together, and from what would be considered hearsay. But my opinion or experiences are just that, mine. I'm attempting to be neutral, which is difficult. And I could be completely wrong, or I could be on the right track. Gut instinct, however, doesn't cut it as evidence or fulfill court scrutiny. At the time of this story's culmination, it's what makes some sense, and I think answers some questions, at least to or for me. You have to remember that this story starts in 1892, so procedures were a little different, and of course forensics were in their infancy and not the capabilities of today. Fingerprints were not even in use in the U.S. at the time. If nothing else, maybe I've just helped Katie to be remembered as a loved sister, daughter, and friend, full of hopes and dreams, and 2 lives that were taken too soon. It was a mild autumn day in Wilmington, Delaware on Thursday, October 20th, 1892. William B. Carswell, a civil engineer and well-known local football player, was reportedly walking in an easterly direction from his home in the suburb of Ellesmere to his office in Wilmington, but decided to take a shortcut across the fields, as he had done so many times. So he took a small footpath towards town. At approximately noon, or just before, and approaching an empty lot area that adjoined the field, he walked past a persimmon tree, one he had seen many times before, and towards the ditch, where he stopped instantly. Frozen in his movement and with a shiver running down his back, there in the ditch before him, he noticed the nearly decapitated and face-battered body of a young white, black-haired female, lying in a pool of blood. Next to, or in her right hand, was a bloody razor, and near to this was what appeared to be some kind of a storage box. William, finally snapping out of it, knew he needed to find help, and ran for help he did. In an adjoining field, he saw Michael McMahon and Charles Seegers working. Upon informing McMahon what he had found, McMahon ran over to the house of Lewis P. Bush on Broome Street, who was known to have a telephone, and called the police. It is alleged that the PD was initially told that this incident might be a suicide, but it's unclear if this is what Carswell told McMahon, or if this was an assumption on McMahon's part based on what Carswell had described to him. Unbeknownst to Carswell or anyone else at the time, he was not the first to find Katie's body that day. Earlier in the morning, 2 young boys were out playing in the field and empty lot areas with their dog. Suddenly the boys noticed the dog was acting funny, whining and barking at the ditch near the persimmon tree. Well, wondering what was wrong, the boys made their way over, and, well, they were terrified at what they saw. running away in terror and afraid they might be in trouble. They said nothing until a much later time. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let me take you back to the beginning as close as I or we can piece together. Katie Dugan, a bright 17-year-old girl with an upcoming 18th birthday on November 22nd, according to a statement made by her mother, had received a letter on Tuesday, October 18th, with the statement, "Meet me Wednesday at the same time and place. Jack." Later, Lizzie, Katie's younger sister, would confirm that she saw the letter and remembered the name Jack, but did not know who that was. It was stated that Katie received many notes or letters, but would routinely destroy them, with the exception of this letter from Jack. It had appeared to Katie's family that she was overly happy for the rest of that day, and went about helping her mother with chores, smiling and contented. Wednesday, October 19th, 1892 was mild, dry and pleasant, and had been a fun-filled day for Katie. Seen through many parts of Wilmington, she spent time with her friends and her sisters, her little sister Lizzie practically glued to her hip as always. Many in Wilmington were excited and looking forward to the Sacred Heart Church Fair that evening. Katie had only been home for a few months now, after having left or been dismissed, depending on reports, as a live-in domestic servant for approximately the past 4 years, according to an apparent statement her mother made. However, there are some accounts that say she was only employed for a few months in that position. Had she been employed as a domestic servant for 4 years, she would have started working there at 13 years old, and the Dugans were reportedly financially stable and well-placed in the community. Her father, James Dugan, was a barber, and it was stated that he ran the barber shop in or on the home's location. The family as a whole were noted to be very close, but, well, things were different back then. I feel as though, like many issues I run into with this story, there was just another misunderstanding or misprint as to her length of employment. But anyway, Katie made frequent visits to the family home during that time, and was very close with her sisters, with whom she shared many secrets. Many secrets. However, anything surrounding Jack or this note, she kept to herself, it seems. Katie had apparently informed Alice, her older sister, on the previous Saturday that she wanted to have a private meeting with her. However, if there were no opportunity to do so, she would write to her and reveal her secrets after she had reached Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. While I'm sure that Alice was confused and concerned about Katie leaving, she apparently kept this conversation and any secrets to herself until their importance became clear after the fact. At approximately 8 p.m. that night, Katie appeared in a happy, excited mood when she donned her shoes, coat, and hat. As she was preparing to leave, well, here came little Lizzie, wanting to step out with her older sister for an evening stroll. But Katie told Lizzie no, to stay there and that she would be back in a few minutes. Katie gave her a little smile, and Lizzie watched her sister and favored companion walk out the door of their Lancaster Avenue home. But apparently, well, Lizzie didn't listen, and followed a little way behind Katie to the corner of Van Buren and 2nd Street, where Katie disappeared into the night for the last time. Lizzie returned home and had apparently informed her mother, Catherine Dugan, that Katie had left. As the night went on and Katie did not return home, there was concern, but Catherine had supposed that Katie had gone to stay with her aunt. When morning came, Catherine sent Lizzie to her aunt's house to find Katie, and the rest of the Dugan family began looking for and inquiring of her. But no one had seen or heard from Katie. After having been informed of William Carswell's discovery, PD Sergeant Ingram and Dog City catcher James E. Wirt arrived on scene at approximately 1:30 p.m. Thursday, October 20th, 1892, took charge, and began a cursory search of the immediate area until detectives could arrive. Apparently, the county coroner, Dr. Sparks, was on a case in Farnhurst and had been informed of the crime scene. However, the body would have to remain in place until he or coroner's assistants could arrive to take possession. Just after approximately 1:30 p.m., and after the arrival of Sergeant Ingram and dog catcher Wirt, Wilmington detectives Hawkins and Hatton and Chief Francis made their way to the empty lot off of Clayton Street at the back of Bush's residence and walked toward the lone persimmon tree. By this time, word had spread around town about a young dead girl being found, and people had already started gathering. Upon arrival, initial observation was what appeared to be a young white female, later identified as Katie Dugan. Long black hair, lying supine, meaning on her back, at a slightly inclined position in the ditch. Her head was noted to be tilted slightly upward and toward the left, but nearly decapitated. Further investigation revealed that her face was noted to have raccoon eyes, bruising around or behind the ears, and what appeared to be some other signs of unknown head trauma. Her left arm was noted to be down by her side, and right arm outstretched with a bloody straight razor either in or next to her right hand. Sources vary. Near this was noted to be a storage box for the same or similar type of straight razor. Her clothing was noted to be fairly clean and straight, without sign of struggle or tearing, or blood spray or dripping over the front of her body. A straw-like materialed hat, later revealed to fit the description of the one Katie was seen wearing, was found approximately 10 feet away, presumably from the direction of her head, but I found nothing stating that. The pooling of darkened, congealed, and or dried surface area blood was noticed to be directly underneath her upper shoulders and head area, and appeared to have no arterial spray around the immediate vicinity. It was very clear to investigators that this was a purposeful, premeditated, and staged crime. There were no indications of struggle noted on the ground, and it appeared that Katie was rendered incapacitated by some unknown means at that time, carried from where she was attacked, placed on the ground where she was found, and then nearly decapitated in that position. It was felt that there was an attempt to make this scene look like a suicide, but that was quickly ruled out due to the presentation. Katie would not have been able to nearly remove her own head, and then there was the lack of blood over the front and lower parts of her clothing or arterial spray. At approximately 2 p.m., Dr. Sparks arrived, and shortly thereafter, coroner assistants Dr. Charles E. Baird and Dr. Albert B. Harris inspected the scene. They made notations, conferred with the investigators, received preliminary witness statements or identification, and then took Katie away to the morgue. By the time Katie was removed from the scene, the presence of onlookers had increased, and rumors and innuendo did as well. Detectives and officers then resumed their investigation by the retrieving of immediate evidence and pertinent witness statements. While the others were busy doing their work, Detective Hatton began excavating around the immediate area of where Katie had laid. Further investigation by stated measure of depth and distance revealed that the immediate area under which Katie's head and upper shoulders had been showed blood penetration into the soil at approximately 8 inches, and the depth of blood penetration shallowed from approximately 6 inches to 5 inches over the distal length of approximately 2 feet, in other words, towards her feet, where it stopped. At this point, it was apparently getting too dark to continue their area search, so detectives called off for the night and decided to return for more processing in a better light of the next morning. However, some interesting statements had apparently been made and would need further investigation. Apparently, during the time period that Katie had been removed to the morgue, word had spread further throughout Wilmington. James Dugan had become aware of a young girl's body being found and then taken to the morgue. By this time, the Dugan family's concern had grown to a near-frantic state, especially with their mother, Catherine. James began the apprehensive walk to the morgue, anxiety and the thoughts that must have been going through his mind, along with the comments and description of passers-by. That would have been overwhelming. When James arrived, it's unclear with whom he initially made contact, but he told of his missing daughter and gave a description of her and what she was wearing. He was then led into the exam room, and there before him, while the autopsy was being conducted, he saw his little girl. There is no statement of his reaction or feelings, but there doesn't need to be one. James identified Katie, and it is thought that during this time, James was made aware that the note of the meeting had been found in her dress and that Katie had been approximately 4 months pregnant. James left and made the agonizing walk home. As rumor and accusations grew, detectives became aware of Richard Riley, who was known to have been seen or spent time with Katie in some fashion. There were also rumors about an unnamed married man who then started to become a person of interest. However, detectives honed in on Riley first. After having obtained a warrant earlier on Thursday evening at approximately 1 a.m., Friday, October 21st, 1892, Chief Francis and Detectives Hatton and Hawkins approached Riley's residence, where he lived with his parents, at 831 Bennett Street, and placed him under arrest. After having been taken to the station, Riley was questioned further and had made a statement that Katie had called him Jack at least once, but he didn't know why. That clearly wasn't his name, and his involvement with her was not as frequent as some rumors might have suggested. Having clarified his alibi and statements, Riley was then released at an unknown time, but detectives and officers kept a tail on Riley while they tracked down other leads and persons of interest. Later on the morning of Friday, October 21st, it was reportedly a mild, cool day, and the Wilmington PD detectives and officers were back out at the crime scene area. During their search, a blood-stained cigarette box with what appeared to be fingerprints and a blood-stained stone described as being approximately 7 inches in length and 3 inches in diameter were discovered at an unknown distance from where Katie had been found. Continuing to search the area, Detective Hatton found bloodstains along the fence rail connected to the crime scene and continued to follow the blood trail all the way to the large sitting stone on Broome Street, between 2nd and Front Streets, where Katie had been seen sitting with a man on Wednesday night. Next to the large sitting stone, Hatton found another blood-stained rock, described as approximately the size of an egg. Initially, it was thought that Katie might have been rendered unconscious here and carried to the crime scene, but further investigation and witness testimony quickly ruled this out. There were just too many people around for that to have gone unnoticed. Several witnesses noticed Katie had been seen on the large sitting stone and also seen walking west on Front Street toward Clayton Street with an unknown tall, slender man wearing a dark suit and a hat. And although it was stated that she may have been crying or upset, she was walking and very conscious. Saturday, October 22, 1892, saw the gathering of family and a large crowd of Wilmington citizens in and around the Lancaster Street home. It was said that throughout the house and into the street could be heard the inconsolable cries and wails of Catherine Dugan as she clung to Katie's body during the viewing. Little Lizzie had passed out and had to be carried to the cab for Katie's funeral procession to St. Paul's Church. It is said that there was no sermon, but a reserved mass, and the entire scene was described as pathetic, as most of the attendants in or outside of the church were overcome with emotion and tears. Upon conclusion of the service, Katie's funeral procession continued on to St. Joseph Cemetery, where she was laid to rest. Throughout the rest of Saturday, and even prior to the burial, it was estimated that approximately 5,000 or more people had trampled through the empty lot area and field on the back side of Bush's residence. And from Katie's funeral into the following days and weeks, the persimmon tree, that had been a familiar and enjoyable landmark and witness to Katie's horrible murder, was said to have been virtually stripped bare of branches, twigs, and bark by the macabre relic hunters. The blood-stained earth, where Katie had been found, was said to have been so dug up and carried off, the owner felt there was a concern for the future crop. It appears that the Dugans may have been more well-placed in society or had more connection than might have been realized. It is said that Catherine Dugan became obsessed and called upon those in influence to find her daughter's killer, including State Attorney General Nicholson. County Coroner Dr. Sparks had already announced that a coroner's inquest would be held on Monday, October 24th, afternoon or evening, and apparently with a jury of 9 already selected. Sunday, October 23, 1892, at an unknown time, saw the arrival of Deputy State Attorney General Giles and Special State Detectives McVeigh and Witzel to City Hall, where they all went straight to work. After combing over information and witness statements, sometime after approximately 7:30 p.m. that night, Court Clerk Adams had been called in and a search warrant was issued for the residence at 505 Broome Street. Police had already been watching the residence and tailing a man fitting the description of the man last seen with Katie on that fateful Wednesday night. Armed with the warrants and fueled by some circumstantial evidence and rumors, Chief Francis, detectives, and officers arrived at the residence and made contact with the male subject in question, later identified as Albert Stout. Apparently, Stout gave a statement of his whereabouts and movements on Wednesday, October 19th, and the house and property were searched. It's unknown what was found or taken as evidence at that time, but rumors implied that Stout was not exactly forthcoming with his relationship with Katie at that point, and there were some doubts as to his statements or movements on the night in question. The questions and search adjourned at an unknown time with no arrest, but police would keep an eye on Albert Stout. On Monday, October 24th, 1892, that saw the beginning of the coroner's inquest and public revelation of Katie and her unborn child's brutal end. As there were no suspects to question at that time, the inquest mainly consisted of the coroner's assistants, Doctors Baird and Harris, describing their findings, including Katie's pregnancy, the fact that this was not a suicide, but a murder committed by a person or persons unknown. The doctors testified that Katie was not standing and had been rendered unconscious or deceased through description of manual strangulation and severe facial and head blunt force trauma prior to the near-complete decapitation. It was then expressed that their initial belief of the murder having happened in the early morning hours of October 20th was incorrect, and that due to their description of what would have been full rigor mortis and other signs at the time of finding her body and autopsy, it was their opinions that Katie's horrible crime had been enacted late in the evening of Wednesday, October 19th. While other witnesses or initial responders were questioned in turn, rumors continued to come to the attention of the investigators. Many, during or after leaving the Sacred Heart Church Fair, described hearing screams and yelling, some thinking them to be from Katie, but those were quickly ruled out because, well, there was a fair going on, and many young people having fun in and around the vicinity. And besides, with the noise of the evening, the crime scene would have been too far away to pinpoint any screams by Katie. Some rumors thought the crime was committed by black members of the community, but these too were ruled out fairly quickly, and some accusations were noted to be cruel hoaxes just to cause trouble. Wilmington police the Deputy Attorney General and state detectives were fairly certain that they had a good idea who their main suspect was, but they needed to be sure. Investigators quickly began to spread the word that they no longer suspected the murderer to be a married man and tried to appear evasive or simply stumped. While Albert Stout was not officially named to anything, it appears that he too was aware of public scrutiny and rumor, and declared his innocence and that he had no involvement in Katie's death. Since Stout was a well-placed member in society and financially well off due to his position with the Charles Warner Company, he had many who would champion his innocence, but some in the community, well, they knew things. The coroner's inquest ended for Monday, but was to continue with testimony on Tuesday. At some point during this time, Riley had been at City Hall under the guise of being re-interviewed. Two men, Edward J. McGoldrick and Thomas Connell, had been at City Hall for some unknown reason. Apparently, they made statements that they had seen Katie with the unknown man on Wednesday, and when they saw Riley at City Hall, they initially thought he was the man that had been seen with Katie that night. This information, along with what was felt as a questionable alibi, led to Riley being rearrested after he had left City Hall. At approximately 3 a.m., Tuesday, October 25, 1892, detectives and officers made contact with Riley at his parents' residence, rearrested him, and held him for sworn testimony before the coroner's inquest later that day. Upon questioning and further testimony of witnesses, it was found that Riley could not be identified as the man seen with Katie. His physical stature appeared inconsistent with the unknown man as well. His alibi for events on Wednesday night and into Thursday afternoon were also substantiated by several other witnesses. The inquest jury concluded that there was no evidence of Riley's involvement in the death of Katie, and he was released without further delay. The coroner's inquest then came to an end, with no further findings. On the same evening of Tuesday, October 25, 1892, James Dugan had apparently been on the hunt to find anything that might help in the investigation, and had been searching outside and inside his Lancaster home. He had made his way through Katie's closet, and there, in the pocket of a dress, was found an envelope. Apparently, Lizzie had remarked that the envelope appeared similar to the one in which Katie had received her note for the Wednesday rendezvous. James Dugan quickly made his way to City Hall and made contact with State Detective McVeigh. It's unclear if it was during this period or another point of questioning, but James apparently recalled seeing a shadowy figure of a man disappear around the corner of his house just before Katie had left on Wednesday night, but could make out no features. McVeigh took the envelope and James left. Rumors persisted, leads were followed, but Albert Stout always remained at the top of the list. Albert was followed and several times would be questioned or pulled from his office at the Charles Warner Company for witness identification, but that was it for nearly 2 years. Rewards had been offered for information leading to an arrest or arrests during that time, but nothing seemed to have any effect. During the period between October 1892 and August 1894, there were changes in personnel at the Wilmington Police Department, and a new coroner was elected, but State Detectives McVeigh and Witzel never let up on the scene. Statements, evidence, consulting with handwriting or other experts, and walking the routes described by witnesses or suspects were all reviewed over and over again. Catherine Dugan, as previously stated, had become obsessed with finding her daughter's killer and constantly hounded those with whom she had influence. It seems that lips that had at one time been tight for one reason or another began to loosen, almost as if time abated their fear. They just couldn't take the guilt any longer, or, at least in one case, did not want to go to their grave with a guilty conscience. Alice apparently finally told Catherine Katie's plan to go to Philadelphia and other issues regarding Katie's time involving Albert Stout and her domestic service at his home. There was also an apparent deathbed confession from an unknown woman who was well aware of the condition of Katie and Albert Stout's proclivities with domestic servants and women in general. Catherine felt as though Albert Stout was her man and gathered her evidence once again to plead her daughter's case. On Thursday, August 30th, 1894, Catherine Dugan met with Deputy State Attorney General Giles, Chief Doolin, and state detectives to, again, show her evidence and demand the arrest of Albert Stout. On Friday, August 31st, 1894, at approximately 9:30 a.m., Catherine was again in Chief Doolin's office with Deputy State Attorney General Giles, State Detectives Witzel and McVeigh, and Magistrate McWhorter. It is reported that Catherine swore out a statement as to Albert Stout being the murderer of Katie and again presented her evidence. Upon compiling what Catherine had, along with statements and evidence that police had gathered, Deputy State Attorney Giles instructed Magistrate McWhorter to issue arrest and search warrants for Albert Stout. Upon finishing with the warrants, Detectives McVeigh and Witzel, Chief Doolin, and other officers made their way to Stout's office at the Charles Warner Company. At some unknown time before 11 a.m., police arrived at Stout's office, where he was encountered with one of his clerks. Detective Witzel advised Stout that he was under arrest, and then read him the warrant. Upon finishing of the reading, Stout stood, donned his street attire, and calmly asked to telephone his attorney, H. Ward. When his request was granted, Stout called Ward and asked him to meet at City Hall. It was noted by the police and other witnesses during this interaction that Stout appeared indifferent, smiling, laughing, or chatting pleasantly during this exchange and during his walk, all the way to City Hall. Now, some who were close to Stout said that this was normal behavior for him, even during times of stress, but these were accusations of murder and directly tied to him, so still odd in my opinion. Upon arriving at City Hall a short time after 11 a.m., Stout met his attorney and began the intake processing. The arrest warrant was scrutinized by Attorney Ward. Stout was asked if he would like to have a phone call or message sent to his wife, but apparently declined at this time, stating that he wouldn't be expected home until later and he always took his lunch at the hotel. However, unbeknownst to Albert Stout, he would not be going home anytime soon. During this time period, it is apparent that Albert's wife had been made aware of his arrest and his house was again searched, with more items taken. It is said that Albert was shown every courtesy, given the entire upper floor of City Hall as his personal cell, and even allowed to order in a more comfortable chair. Apparently his friends and influential citizens of Wilmington also made it known that they were keeping an eye on Albert's treatment, and with whom he had dealings. On Monday, September 3rd, it was assumed that Stout would have an arraignment, but they were all shocked when Attorney Ward waived the arraignment and wanted a private conference with Magistrate McWhorter and State Attorney General Nicholson. Apparently, this was agreed to, and a meeting was set up for 4 p.m. at the magistrate's office. Upon arrival at approximately 4 p.m., and under the guard of Chief Doolin and former House Sergeant Marr, Albert Stout entered the magistrate's office area, but he was not expecting a little surprise that awaited him. It was said that Stout's eyes winced, twitched, and he went pale when seeing the attractive, unknown blonde woman sitting in the left-hand corner by the front entrance. As Albert made his way to sit in the far corner of the room, the unknown lady kept her eyes fixed upon him. After Stout sat down, Detective McVeigh leaned in and appeared to have a conversation with the unknown lady, who then arose from her seat and left the room with Detective McVeigh. Witnesses say it was not until this unknown woman left that Stout appeared to relax and his color came back. Having seemed to cause quite a stir, all attempts to identify the mysterious woman failed, as the police said she was important to the case, and strict orders to conceal her identity were given by State Attorney General Nicholson. But Stout, well, he already knew who she was. The meeting was said to be fairly short, and not all particulars disclosed, but Attorney Ward stated that Stout should remain in custody until the case was presented before a grand jury or trial. Apparently, there were some fears of Stout's safety due to his accusations and arrest. These terms were agreed to, and it said that Stout chatted and laughed all the way back to his City Hall cell, as if he were a 4-year-old boy, without a care in the world. On Tuesday, September 4th, 1894, Albert Stout was transferred to Newcastle Jail to await the convening of a grand jury in the following week or so. And while the police and State AG Nicholson kept their cards close, they assured the media and public that they had enough evidence against Albert Stout to get an indictment. Thursday, September 20th, 1894, saw the convening of the grand jury. During the morning session, they heard statements from several witnesses, some of whom now swear that Albert Stout was the man they saw Katie with on the night in question. There was testimony from an unknown handwriting expert, Chief Dugan, and State Detectives McVeigh and Witzel regarding Albert Stout's handwriting samples. How peculiar the writing was, and apparently specific to Stout's style and notation. And although it appeared to be an attempt to disguise the handwriting, it was stated that Albert Stout was the author of the communique and envelope in question. Then there was the papers and envelopes matching the same type used in communicating with Katie found in his home. There was apparently evidence uncovered that detailed Albert Stout owned the empty lot where Katie's body was found. Chief Dugan, like others, also testified that Stout's alibi had changed, along with evasiveness about having been Katie's employer, and did not match to his findings in time or probability as to Stout's movements on that fateful night. Stout stated that he left his office at approximately 7:25 p.m., walked out onto Front Street, and down to Monroe Street, boarded a horse-drawn streetcar, and rode that to Franklin Street to drop off a bill at an unstated address. Stout stated that he rang the bell and waited for an unknown period of time, but there was no answer. Stout then left and walked up Franklin to 2nd Street when he remembered that he all of a sudden forgot to pick up his laundry on 2nd and French Streets. Stout stated that he walked all the way from Franklin and 2nd Streets to the Chinese Laundry on 2nd and French Street, retrieved his laundry, and then walked down to Front Street and Market Street, where he then took street trolleys to 8th Street, disembarked and arrived at his home at 505 Broome Street at approximately 8:05 p.m., and never left again that evening. Chief Dugan testified that he walked or rode this same route at varying times and found that on average, it took him approximately 1 hour and 5 minutes to complete the course stated by Stout. Further investigation also revealed that the unknown blonde female that identified Stout at the magistrate's office was from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and that Stout had also rented a house there for Katie during her pregnancy. What exact role the mysterious blonde female was to fulfill during this mystery? Well, much like her name, that detail has been lost to time. Mary Baker, the new servant girl, then testified that she had been in bed reading, heard the clock chime 9 p.m., and sometime after 9:30 p.m., she put her book down, turned out her light, and snuggled down to go to sleep. Sometime between 9:30 and Hearing the clock chime at 10 p.m., Mary states she heard the front door open, and Albert Stout came in. She knew it was Stout because everyone else was in bed, and she knew his sound. I cannot find who specifically testified, but either Catherine, Alice, or both had testified that Katie had confided in Alice about the goings-on at the Stout residence during her employment. It appears that they might have known that Katie was pregnant and was planning on going to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania during her pregnancy and birth. It was also stated that Katie had attended a 40-hour devotional exercise at St. Paul's Church and, supposedly, had confessed to Father Bradford of her adulterous affair and pregnancy, naming Albert Stout as her lover and father of her child. However, not only was this denied by the church, but Katie was denied having been seen at church for several months. Besides, due to the rites of confession, nothing would have been disclosed anyway. The grand jury was also made aware of the deathbed confession. Testimony as to the autopsy and findings were also presented and impressed upon the jury, as well as the belief that the police and prosecution had the right man in their sights from the beginning. When the witnesses were done, and the grand jury began to deliberate, there were feelings that no bill for an indictment would be reached due to Stout's standing in politics, but many hoped there would be, so that the case could be settled and done, either by a trial jury's acquittal or a guilty or not guilty verdict. As the rest of the morning went on and the lunch break came and went, the tension was becoming noticeable. Many felt disheartened, and that justice would yet again elude Katie. Finally, late in the afternoon of Thursday, September 20th, 1894, the jury returned with no bill, insufficient evidence to indict Albert Stout. Stout was immediately released and lauded as a persecuted hero, a victim of the system, and celebrated by many from Newcastle back to Wilmington. I found nothing describing the reaction of the Dugan family. It just seems as if they faded away. Many in Wilmington and the surrounding areas wondered if there might be newer, better evidence found for a grand jury or trial or maybe a new suspect. But there weren't. Time went on, and as so often happens, people just want to forget and move on with life. It seems that Albert Stout continued to work for the Charles Warner Company and go on with his familial facade and status in the society of Wilmington, but I know not what became of him. As far as for Mary Baker, Stout's newest domestic girl, I have no information on what became of her. I hope she fared well. As far as for the Dugan family, it is said that Catherine never fully recovered from the loss of her daughter, but then that would be no surprise. As I said before, I had no intention of writing a book on this story, but I wanted to find information that would make sense or try and tie this unsolved mystery together. I believe that were we to go back in time to October 20th, 1892 with modern forensics, Albert Stout would have been tried, convicted, and sent to the gallows. I believe that something changed that night of Wednesday, October 19th, 1892. The original plan had somehow gone awry that threw Albert into a panic. I believe that Jack was a nickname that Katie had used to hide Albert Stout's identity while they carried on their affair, and that she accidentally called Riley Jack. Well, it was just that, an accident. Whether Katie decided she didn't want to go to Philadelphia or said she had told or was going to tell someone about the affair and pregnancy, I don't know. But a well-placed married man and father of three caught up in an open scandal like this? Oh, he couldn't have that. Stout was described as cool and clear, quick thinking and decisive under pressure. He walked Katie in a westerly direction down Front Street to Clayton Street, and then south to the vacant property he allegedly owned. I don't believe Katie did scream. Albert was reportedly over 6 feet tall and described as a very strong man. I believe that at some point Stout overpowered and grabbed Katie by the throat, and while choking or strangling her with one hand, he then used the 7-inch rock to finish incapacitating her. There were no signs of struggle noted, so this was done quickly and quietly. Lewis P. Bush had been home that evening and heard nothing. I believe Stout picked Katie up and placed her in the ditch, and by this time, due to lack of blood on her clothing or signs of arterial spray, she was already deceased, having succumbed to both or either blunt force trauma and manual strangulation. Stout then finished with his near decapitation. And I believe Stout intended to leave Katie in the ditch until the next night. Walking through the field in a south or southwest direction would take him down to the river and keep him away from the prying eyes of shift workers along the wharf area or witnesses downtown. However, I believe he suddenly realized that he dropped or was missing something, maybe like a crumpled note. Nobody should be coming through his empty lot, but just in case, he stages the scene. Could be when James Dugan saw a shadowy figure on his property, Stout had grabbed a razor from the barber shop. At any rate, I believe this is where the blood trail that Detective Hatton found comes into play. Stout wanted to stay in the shadows, so he went through the backyards and jumped fences all the way up to Front Street. There, at the fence, along Front Street, he looked to make sure the coast was clear. He made his way toward the Sitting Rock, where he had been seen with Katie just a short time before. Perhaps on the ground, that small-legged rock initially looked like a crumpled piece of paper or something else. The streetlights weren't all that great, so he picked it up, leaving blood behind. His wife was apparently used to him working late, but time is ticking, and he needs to get home. And a short time after, Mary Baker then hears Stout come in. While I have no evidence, I also believe that Mrs. Stout was well aware of Albert's extramarital activities and may have had direct or indirect evidence or thoughts about involvement with Katie. Due to the time period and social standing and pressures, I believe Mrs. Stout was just going along to keep face. However, I believe that she pressured Albert in releasing Katie from service, and when made aware or figured out that Albert was involved in Katie's murder, she helped clean up any evidence after the fact. Self-preservation, right, wrong, or indifferent, can lead people to do unordinary things. These are just some of my thoughts and opinions. But like I said before, gut instinct won't cut it in court, and the records just aren't there. And I'm not sure that's by accident. It seems that many things or people directly involved in this case just went away. Dr. Sparks and the coroner's assistants were replaced. The Wilmington Detective Division was disbanded, and officers involved were fired or faded from view. Chief Francis was replaced. And, well, records just went missing. The only ones who seemed untouched by local politics or Stout's influence were State Attorney General Nicholson, Deputy A.G. Giles, and State Detectives McVeigh and Witzel. Unfortunately, it seems as though we may never know the full story, and everyone's guess is as good as mine. Katie Dugan still lies in St. Joseph Catholic Cemetery. I tried to find her, but I found no pictures of a headstone, no listed date of birth, and her date of death is incorrect. I called the Historical Society and even the church multiple times, but nobody answered. I didn't leave any messages or email info. I just didn't feel like making an addition to my Christmas card list or more friends to ignore. life was never promised to be fair. But Katie Dugan, like so many before and since, certainly did not deserve to be tossed away and forgot. If you like these stories, subscribe, like, and share, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for future stories. And as always, I thank you for taking the time to listen. The end.